My name is Giselle Hicks. I am 34. Last Sunday, my parents and my older brother walked through my front door in Sandy, Utah, carrying 6 pieces of matching luggage. It had been 15 years since my father handed me a black plastic trash bag, told me I was dead to him, and locked me out of my childhood home. Now he stood in my foyer, looked at my vaulted ceilings, and announced they were moving in. He used the exact phrase I expected: family takes care of family. My older brother Tyler stood right behind him, tapping a set of brass keys against his palm, like he was the landlord coming to collect rent. They expected a screaming match. They wanted me to cry, to argue, to give them a reason to call the police and claim I was unstable. I did none of those things. I stepped aside, gestured toward the living room, and invited them into the kitchen for coffee. My father puffed out his chest and walked to the kitchen island with a smirk. He thought he had broken me. He thought my silence was the white flag he demanded a week earlier. Then he looked down at the granite counter. Sitting next to the French press was a very specific stack of paper. The top document was the foreclosure deed to his own estate, the sprawling house he spent years telling everyone was fully paid off. Pinned to the front was the county auction receipt. It proved an anonymous limited liability company had purchased the defaulted debt 3 days prior. He did not know the LLC belonged to me. He did not know I was now his primary creditor. Beside the deed rested a neat pile of intercepted credit card applications, auto loans, and tax forms. Every single document contained my Social Security number, forged with his contact information. My mother stopped walking. Her grip loosened, and her new designer handbag hit the tile floor with a heavy thud. Tyler dropped his keys. The smug expression washed off my father's face, leaving behind the pale, hollow realization that he had just marched his family into a federal snare. I spent the last month carefully laying out. Before I explain how I legally dismantled their lives, hit the like and subscribe button. Drop your age in the comments and let me know you are listening to QT Told Stories. Now, let me take you back to 3 weeks ago. The beginning of the end did not start with a federal lawsuit. It started on a quiet Tuesday afternoon with the sound of a heavy diesel engine idling outside my living room window. I work from home as a senior healthcare compliance auditor. My entire career is built on finding discrepancies in paperwork that people desperately want hidden. When I heard the engine, I looked through the blinds. A rented recreational vehicle was parallel parked directly in front of my mailbox, taking up half the street. The driver's side door opened, and Richard Hicks, my father, stepped onto the pavement. He adjusted his jacket, looked at my house, and gave a sharp nod to my mother in the passenger seat. I had not heard his voice since I was 19 years old. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was an unknown number, but I recognized the local area code. I did not pick up. I watched my security feed as they marched up my driveway, unaware that every step they took was about to be documented, audited, and used to systematically ruin them. I watched the security feed on my monitor. My father raised his fist and pounded on the heavy oak door. The sound echoed through my hallway, a dull thud that immediately pulled me backward in time. 15 years ago, that exact same knock hit my bedroom door. I was 19. I had just finished a 12-hour shift waiting tables to pay for my community college textbooks. My father stood in my doorway, holding a stack of loan documents and a black plastic trash bag. He wanted my signature. Tyler, my older brother, had a brilliant idea for a technology startup. Tyler always had brilliant ideas, and they always required someone else to take the financial risk. My parents had already mortgaged their home to the limit. They needed a co-signer to secure a secondary line of credit for $100,000. My credit score was perfect. I was young, employed, and unburdened by debt. They demanded I sign the guarantor forms. When I looked at the interest rates and the balloon payments, the math did not make sense. I refused to sign my life away. My father did not argue. He threw the empty trash bag onto my twin bed. He told me I had 10 minutes to pack whatever fit inside it. If I was not willing to invest in the family, I was no longer part of it. I walked out into the cold November night, holding 30 pounds of cheap clothing. I stopped at the end of the driveway and looked back at the living room window. Through the glass, I watched my father hand Tyler a crisp cashier check. They were smiling. They were celebrating the future. It took Tyler exactly 6 months to burn through every cent of that money. The startup dissolved into a mountain of debt. It took me 15 years of relentless discipline to build my own life. I paid my way through a degree in finance. I earned my compliance certifications. I bought my home in Sandy. I built a fortress they could never breach. Now the man who threw me into the street was standing on my porch, expecting me to open the door and hand over my fortress. I walked to the foyer and unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door exactly halfway. My mother stepped forward first. Beverly wore a pastel cardigan and a practiced, tight-lipped smile. This is the weapon of choice in our culture, the Utah nice approach. It relies on passive aggression disguised as polite concern. "Giselle, sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "We have missed you so much. It has been too long. Your father and I are transitioning between properties, and we thought this would be a wonderful opportunity to reconnect. We just need to stay in your guest rooms for a few weeks while we sort out our next chapter." She reached out to touch my arm. I took a half step back. My expression remained neutral. "You are not moving in," I said. My voice was level, the exact tone I use when informing a hospital administrator of a compliance violation. My father dropped his false smile. The patriarchal authority figure reemerged. "Giselle, we are your parents. We are family. And family takes care of family. We are parking the rig and bringing our bags inside. Do not make this difficult." I looked at the heavy recreational vehicle idling by the curb, then back at him. "You have 2 minutes to return to your vehicle and drive away," I said. "If you attempt to bring luggage into my home, I will consider it a home invasion. If you refuse to leave the property, I will dispatch law enforcement to remove trespassers. This is not a negotiation. Have a safe drive." I closed the door. The deadbolt engaged with a sharp, satisfying click. I walked back to my office and pulled up the live feed from my doorbell camera. Richard stood on the porch for a long time. His face flushed a deep crimson. He raised his hand as if to pound on the door again, but he noticed the glowing blue ring of the camera lens. He knew he was being recorded. He lowered his fist, muttered something to my mother, and they retreated down the driveway. They did not leave. They climbed back into the recreational vehicle, turned off the engine, and initiated a psychological siege. For the next 48 hours, they lived on the public street directly in front of my property line. They set up folding camp chairs on the sidewalk. They drank coffee in the morning and waved cheerfully at my neighbors, playing the role of loving, misunderstood grandparents visiting their estranged daughter. They wanted the neighbors to see me as the villain. They wanted the social pressure to crack my boundaries. Every time I walked to my car to run an errand, my mother would call out, asking if I needed help with anything, projecting her voice so the people across the street could hear. My father would stand by the bumper, shaking his head in manufactured sorrow. They thought this theater would break my resolve. They forgot they were dealing with an auditor. I do not deal in emotions. I deal in data. While they sat in their canvas chairs trying to weaponize neighborhood gossip, I sat at my dual monitors and began pulling threads. My first target was the vehicle parked outside. A luxury motorhome rental runs upwards of $300 a day. If Richard and Beverly were truly transitioning between properties, it meant they had sold their house. But people flush with cash from a real estate sale do not beg their estranged daughters for free lodging. The math was wrong. When the math is wrong, someone is lying. I zoomed in on the high-definition security feed. The license plate was registered in Nevada, which meant it was a commercial rental fleet vehicle. I noted the specific make model and fleet identification number printed on the rear bumper. It took me less than 20 minutes to cross-reference the fleet number with the 3 major rental agencies operating in the Salt Lake Valley. I found the parent company. As a compliance officer, I possess legitimate access to a variety of background verification databases used to track corporate vendor histories and liability insurance. I ran a skip trace on the plate. The system returned the rental agreement details. The names Richard and Beverly Hicks did not appear anywhere on the contract. The recreational vehicle was rented under the name Chloe Hicks. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. The pieces began clicking into place, shifting the picture from a simple family annoyance to a severe legal liability. Chloe is Tyler's wife. She is a highly educated, successful architectural consultant. She comes from a hardworking African-American family and protects her credit score fiercely. Tyler always relied on her income to subsidize his endless string of failed entrepreneurial ventures. I knew Tyler. I knew his ego. Tyler would never willingly spend thousands of dollars of his own household money to rent a luxury vehicle for our parents to live in. Furthermore, Chloe is meticulous. She would never authorize a long-term, open-ended rental agreement for Richard and Beverly, knowing their history of financial instability. There was only one logical conclusion. Chloe did not know she had rented this vehicle. My parents were not just broke. They had not just lost their home. They were actively utilizing stolen credit to survive, and they were using the identity of their own daughter-in-law. Tyler had to be the one facilitating the transaction. He had access to Chloe's physical cards and her personal identification details. He was siphoning her clean financial record to keep his parents off the streets, keeping his own hands seemingly clean while burning down his wife's future. I stared at the name on the rental agreement, Chloe Hicks. She was an innocent party sleeping next to a thief. The minor conflict on my front porch had just evaporated. The annoying parents sitting in lawn chairs were no longer just trespassers. They were active participants in felony identity theft. They were hunting for a new host to bleed dry, and they had driven their stolen mobile home directly to my front door. They knew Chloe's credit would eventually flag the fraudulent charges. They needed a fresh Social Security number. They needed my pristine, untouched financial record. I did not feel anger. I felt the cold, sharp focus of a predator catching the scent of blood in the water. I picked up my phone and opened my encrypted notes application. I created a new folder titled Federal Evidence. I saved the rental agreement, PDF. I saved the 48 hours of video footage showing my parents occupying the stolen vehicle. They wanted to use the illusion of family to force their way into my life. I was going to use the reality of the law to lock them out of society. The first thread was pulled. The fabric of their lies was already beginning to unravel. Now I needed to force them into making a critical error. I needed to dangle a bait so irresistible they would rush their timeline and leave a permanent paper trail. I stood up from my desk, walked to the front window, and looked at my mother sitting in her folding chair. I unlocked the front door, stepping onto the porch to plant the seed that would ultimately destroy them. I stepped onto the concrete porch. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across my manicured lawn. My mother sat in her canvas folding chair next to the idling recreational vehicle. She held a ceramic mug, playing the part of a relaxed neighbor, enjoying the suburban Utah breeze. When she heard the deadbolt click, she turned her head. Her eyes lit up with predatory hope. She thought the silent treatment had worn me down. She assumed I was coming outside to surrender. I walked down the driveway toward my mailbox. I did not look at her. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, retrieving a stack of junk mail and utility bills. "Giselle," my mother called out. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her pastel cardigan. "Have you thought about what your father said? We really do not want to be a burden. We just need a little time to get our affairs in order." I closed the mailbox and turned to face her. I allowed a heavy, uncomfortable pause to stretch between us. "You are wasting your time," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of any emotional fluctuation. "You need to find another permanent solution. I am speaking with a commercial realtor tomorrow morning. I am listing this property for sale and relocating out of state by the end of the month." The lie was surgically precise. I had no intention of selling my home. I built this sanctuary brick by brick, and I would never abandon it. But my mother did not know that. She only knew what her survival instincts told her. I watched the artificial warmth drain from her face. Her jaw tightened. The ceramic mug in her hand shook slightly, spilling a few drops of dark coffee onto the pristine pavement. The concept of me relocating destroyed their entire parasitic strategy. They needed my physical Utah address to establish residency for their fraudulent loan applications. They needed my geographic proximity to intercept documents and manipulate the local banking branches. If I vanished across state lines, their access to my immaculate credit score vanished with me. I turned my back on her and walked inside. I locked the door and watched the security monitor. The panic was instantaneous. My mother dropped the mug onto the camp chair and hurried into the motorhome. 10 minutes later, the heavy diesel engine roared to life. The vehicle pulled away from the curb, leaving black tire marks on the asphalt. They were retreating, but they were not surrendering. They were regrouping. I had forced them onto a compressed timeline. Desperation makes criminals careless. I knew they would attempt a shortcut, and a shortcut always leaves a trail. 3 days passed in absolute silence. The street remained clear. My phone did not ring. The quiet would unnerve a normal person, but an auditor understands that silence is just the incubation period for a discrepancy. On Thursday morning, the discrepancy arrived. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing a corporate compliance file when my phone vibrated. A notification illuminated the screen. It was an automated alert from the United States Postal Service. I enrolled in the Informed Delivery program years ago. It is a standard security measure that sends a digital scan of every piece of mail destined for my address before it ever reaches the physical box. I opened the application. The alert was not a scan of a letter. It was a system update. A formal change of address request had been processed for Giselle Hicks. According to the federal database, I had allegedly authorized the post office to redirect all my physical mail to a post office box located in Provo, a city 45 minutes south of my home. Any ordinary citizen would immediately call the postal inspector, cancel the request, and confront the people responsible. I am not an ordinary citizen. Confrontation is a warning. I do not issue warnings to thieves. I gather exhibits for their prosecution. Redirecting mail without authorization is not a simple misdemeanor. It is a federal offense carrying severe penalties. My parents were escalating the war. They needed to intercept my bank statements, pre-approved credit offers, and verification pins to execute their identity theft. But my parents lacked the technical proficiency to navigate federal postal databases and bypass security verification prompts. Richard and Beverly could barely operate a smartphone without assistance. They had an accomplice. I logged into my home security network. My Ring doorbell camera acts as the primary sentry for my property. It records high-definition video, captures crisp audio, and stores the data in a secure cloud server. I pulled up the motion trigger logs for the past 72 hours. I filtered the timestamps, focusing on the hours between midnight and dawn. At exactly 2:14 in the morning on Wednesday, the motion sensor had tripped. I maximized the video feed on my dual monitors. The streetlights illuminated my driveway in a pale amber glow. A dark sedan coasted to a stop 3 houses down, its headlights deactivated to avoid detection. A figure emerged from the driver's side door. The person wore a dark hooded sweatshirt and a medical face mask, walking with a hurried, tense stride. The figure stepped onto my property. He bypassed the front porch and walked directly toward the locking mailbox mounted on a brick pillar near the curb. I paused the video. I zoomed in on the face. The medical mask covered his nose and mouth, but the street lamp caught his eyes, the slope of his forehead, and the distinct, arrogant posture I had known my entire life. It was Tyler. My older brother, the failed entrepreneur, the golden child who burned through $100,000 of our parents' money 15 years ago. He was acting as the operative for their fraud. I resumed the playback. Tyler pulled a small metallic object from his pocket. It was a universal master key, the kind easily purchased on obscure internet forums by amateur thieves targeting suburban mail routes. He slid the key into the brass lock of my mailbox. The mechanism turned with a soft click. He opened the heavy metal door, reached inside, and extracted a thick stack of envelopes. I recognized the distinctive blue logo on the top envelope. It was my monthly investment portfolio statement. Tyler shoved the stolen mail into the front pocket of his hooded sweatshirt. He relocked the box, turned on his heel, and jogged back toward the dark sedan. The entire operation took less than 40 seconds. He drove away thinking he was a phantom. He thought he had successfully intercepted my financial data without leaving a single fingerprint. He did not realize he had just starred in a high-definition federal evidence exhibit. Tyler stealing my mail confirmed the true structure of the conspiracy. Richard and Beverly were the desperate faces of the operation, but Tyler was the architect. He was using their desperation to orchestrate the identity theft, likely planning to siphon the fraudulent funds into his own failing accounts while leaving our parents to take the legal fall. I downloaded the video file. I exported the change of address confirmation email from the Postal Service. I placed both files into the encrypted folder on my secure hard drive. The evidence was pristine, undeniable, and federally actionable. I had the bait, I had the crime, I had the perpetrator on tape. But a single count of mail fraud was not enough to ensure a maximum sentence. I wanted the entire network dismantled. I wanted Tyler to feel the exact same terror I felt at 19 when I was thrown onto the street. To achieve that, I needed to let him believe his plan was working perfectly. I needed him to escalate. I left the fraudulent change of address active. Let him collect my junk mail. Let him think he held the keys to my kingdom. I initiated a silent credit freeze with all 3 major bureaus, ensuring any application he submitted would hit a concrete wall. But I did not alert him to the freeze. I closed my laptop and walked to the kitchen to pour a fresh cup of coffee. The trap was set, but Tyler is an impatient man. The stolen mail would not satisfy him for long. He needed physical signatures. He needed compliance. When the mail failed to produce the immediate cash he required, his arrogance would override his caution. My phone vibrated on the granite counter. A text message illuminated the screen. It was from Tyler. The message contained no greeting. It was a direct, localized threat. "We need to talk about your attitude regarding Mom and Dad. I know where your office is. See you tomorrow at lunch. Do not try to hide." He was no longer hiding in the shadows at 2 in the morning. He was bringing the war into the daylight. He was coming to my corporate headquarters to leverage my professional reputation against me. He expected me to cower in a public parking garage. He was about to learn that you do not ambush a compliance auditor on her own territory. I locked my screen and set the phone down. Tomorrow, Tyler was going to drop the final piece of the puzzle right into my hands. I work on the 14th floor of a corporate high-rise in downtown Salt Lake City. The building houses several healthcare networks, an insurance conglomerate, and a federal regulatory contractor. Because of the sensitive patient data flowing through our servers, the physical security architecture is uncompromising. Employees must pass through a biometric turnstile in the lobby, scan an encrypted key card at the elevator bank, and enter a secondary PIN code to access individual department floors. Tyler sent his text message threatening to ambush me at lunch, operating under the delusion that my workplace was a casual environment where he could simply stroll past a receptionist and knock on my office door. He did not understand the perimeter he was threatening to breach. I did not reply to his message. Engaging with a threat only validates the person making it. Instead, I opened my personnel file and printed a high-resolution photograph of my brother. I walked down to the lobby and handed the image to the shift supervisor at the primary security desk. I informed the guard that an estranged relative was experiencing a financial crisis and might attempt to cause a disturbance on the property. I requested they flag his face in the automated camera system and deny him entry. I returned to my desk and continued auditing a Medicare compliance report. My heart rate did not elevate. My breathing remained steady. I knew Tyler would fail to penetrate the lobby, which meant he would pivot to the only accessible vector left, the adjacent public parking structure. At 12:15, I packed my leather briefcase, took the private employee elevator down to the sublevel, and walked through the reinforced doors into the concrete garage. The air smelled of cold exhaust and damp asphalt. My designated parking spot was located on the third tier, a quiet sector reserved for senior staff. The acoustics in a concrete structure amplify every sound. I heard my own heels clicking against the pavement. Then I heard a heavy, uneven footstep echo from behind a structural pillar. Tyler stepped out of the shadows and blocked the path to my vehicle. He wore a tailored suit jacket over a wrinkled dress shirt, an outfit designed to project authority but betrayed by his frantic energy. His eyes were bloodshot. The faint odor of stale coffee and stale desperation clung to him. Tyler spent his entire life coasting on charm and volume. When he failed to secure a business deal, he would raise his voice until the other party yielded just to escape the noise. He assumed women would always shrink to avoid a public scene. He learned this behavior from our mother, who always placated his tantrums to maintain the illusion of family peace. He expected me to cower. He expected me to write a check just to make him go away. "Hello, Tyler," I said. I stopped walking, maintaining a distance of exactly 6 feet. I kept my hands relaxed at my sides. "You think you are so smart," he said, his voice echoing off the low concrete ceiling. "You think ignoring my messages makes you untouchable. Mom is having panic attacks in a rented motorhome because you refuse to open your door." "You are blocking my vehicle," I replied. "Please step aside." He took a step forward, invading my personal space. The veins in his neck strained against his collar. "I am not going anywhere until you sign the transfer documents," he hissed. "You are hoarding wealth while our parents are destitute. Do you know what human resources will do when I walk upstairs and hand them a file detailing your elder financial abuse? I will ruin your professional reputation. I will tell your director you are abandoning vulnerable dependents. You will lose your license." He pointed a finger at my face, waiting for the threat to land. He wanted me to beg him to keep his voice down. I looked at him with the same detached curiosity I use when examining a forged medical invoice. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. "You cannot go upstairs, Tyler," I said. "You cannot even get past the lobby turnstiles. Furthermore, human resources does not adjudicate private family disputes. If you attempt to file a baseless claim of elder abuse to extort money from me, I will refer the matter to the corporate legal department for a defamation suit." His face flushed dark red. His charm had failed. His intimidation had failed. He realized he had zero leverage. "I am going to destroy you," he shouted, abandoning his polished persona and reverting to the volatile teenager who used to punch holes in the drywall of our childhood home. I reached into my pocket and pressed my thumb against the silent alarm button on my corporate key fob. 2 taps triggered a geolocation beacon directly to the security dispatch desk. Tyler raised his arms, preparing to launch into another tirade, but a sudden flash of amber light painted the concrete walls yellow. An electric security cart hummed around the corner, its tires squealing as it accelerated down the ramp. The cart braked sharply behind Tyler. 2 uniformed guards stepped out. These were not amateur watchmen. They were former law enforcement officers employed by the building management to protect high-value corporate assets. "Is there a problem here, Ms. Hicks?" the lead guard asked, resting his hand on his utility belt. "This man is trespassing," I said, keeping my tone crisp and professional. "He is an estranged relative attempting to extort money from me. I want him removed from the premises immediately." Tyler spun around to face the guards. He forced a wide, artificial smile, attempting to deploy the same predatory charm he used on novice investors. "Officer, this is just a misunderstanding," Tyler said, raising his hands in a gesture of false surrender. "My sister and I are having a private family disagreement. I was just leaving." The guard did not smile back. He stepped between Tyler and me. "You are on private corporate property, sir. You need to provide identification, and then you need to walk toward the exit stairs. If you resist, we will detain you and contact the Salt Lake City Police." Tyler's artificial smile cracked. He looked at the guards, then looked at me. The reality of his situation crushed his ego. He was not a commanding patriarch demanding respect. He was an unauthorized intruder being ordered to leave by security personnel. He patted his suit jacket, frantically searching for his wallet. His hands were shaking. He pulled out his driver license and handed it to the officer. The second guard pulled a clipboard from the cart and began writing a formal trespass notice, legally barring Tyler from entering the building or the parking structure ever again. I watched the entire process in silence. Tyler signed the trespass warning with jerky, humiliated strokes of a pen. The guard handed him a yellow carbon copy and ordered him to walk toward the exit ramp. Tyler grabbed the slip of paper. He shot me one final look of pure, concentrated hatred. He spun on his heel and began a fast, furious walk toward the stairwell. In his frantic haste to escape the humiliation, he reached into his jacket pocket to secure his keys. As he pulled his hand out, a folded manila envelope slipped from the lining of his coat. The envelope fell onto the oily concrete, sliding under the bumper of a parked sedan. Tyler did not hear it fall. He was too focused on his own embarrassment, pushing through the heavy fire doors and disappearing into the stairwell. The security guards waited until the door latched shut. They asked if I needed an escort to my vehicle. I thanked them for their prompt response and assured them I was perfectly safe. The cart hummed away, leaving me alone on the third tier. I waited 30 seconds to ensure the area was clear. I walked over to the parked sedan, crouched down, and retrieved the manila envelope from the dirty pavement. The paper was thick and slightly crumpled. It bore the logo of a prominent regional credit union. I unlocked my car, sat in the driver's seat, and engaged the door locks before opening the flap. Inside was a carbon copy of an automotive loan application. The document was partially filled out in blue ink. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was the same slanted, heavy print my father used to sign my birthday cards when I was a child. The loan requested $60,000 for the purchase of a luxury trim pickup truck. I scanned the applicant information block. The name printed on the primary borrower line was Giselle Hicks. The address listed was my residential property in Sandy. The Social Security number written in the designated boxes was my exact 9-digit identifier. My parents had memorized it years ago when they claimed me as a dependent on their taxes. I traced my finger down to the contact information section. This is where the fraud always falls apart. A criminal needs the bank to contact them, not the victim. The primary phone number listed on the application did not belong to me. I pulled out my mobile device and cross-referenced the digits. The number matched the contact profile for Tyler. The secondary contact was an email address. It was a generic webmail account utilizing a variation of my first name and birth year, an account I had never created. Tyler and my father had constructed a digital shadow identity, a proxy profile they could control to intercept verification calls and approval emails from the underwriter. The scope of the crime had just fundamentally shifted. Stealing my mail in the dead of night was a federal postal violation. Forging a signature on an active credit application for a $60,000 vehicle crossed the threshold into felony bank fraud. The application required accompanying documentation. A lender does not hand over that amount of capital without verifying employment and income. I flipped to the second page of the packet. Attached to the back of the application was a laser-printed pay stub. It displayed my corporate title, my correct salary bracket, and the logo of my employer. It was a flawless forgery, generated using sophisticated accounting software. My parents did not possess the technical literacy to create a fraudulent corporate pay stub. Tyler did. Tyler was not just running errands for our destitute parents. He was the architect of the entire financial operation. He was utilizing their desperation, directing them to submit the physical paperwork while he fabricated the digital evidence to support it. I placed the documents back into the manila envelope. The ambient noise of the parking garage faded into the background. I stared at the steering wheel, processing the weight of the evidence resting on the passenger seat. The minor harassment campaign had officially evolved into a syndicated criminal enterprise operating within my jurisdiction. To destroy an enterprise, you must trace the money back to its origin point. I needed to uncover exactly how deep Tyler had buried them in debt, and I needed to know what other assets he was leveraging to keep his sinking ship afloat. I started the engine of my car. I was not going back upstairs to audit medical records. I was going home to audit my own bloodline. I drove back to my house in Sandy. The afternoon traffic crawled along the interstate, but my mind operated several steps ahead of the congested lanes. I pulled into my driveway. The street was empty. The stolen motorhome was nowhere in sight. My parents were likely circling the valley, searching for another free parking space to plan their next move. I carried my leather briefcase into my home office, locked the door, and closed the wooden blinds. The room fell into a cool, muted gray. I sat at my workstation and woke up the dual monitors. My profession requires access to proprietary databases that aggregate financial histories, civil judgments, and criminal records. These tools are designed to detect corporate embezzlement and healthcare compliance breaches. Today, I aimed those same tools at my own bloodline. I pulled the forged auto loan application from the manila envelope and placed it flat on my desk. The blue ink mocked me. But ink is just a symptom. I needed to diagnose the disease. I opened a secure browser window and logged into LexisNexis. I typed Richard and Beverly Hicks into the search bar, bypassed the standard consumer filters, and requested a comprehensive background dossier. The system processed the query. 30 seconds later, the screen populated with a scrolling cascade of legal destruction. My parents did not just mismanage their retirement portfolio, they were financial ghosts. The timeline painted a grim, precise picture of their downfall. 4 years ago, they began taking out high-interest personal loans. 2 years ago, they filed for Chapter 11 restructuring, which quickly devolved into a Chapter 7 liquidation. The sprawling suburban house they always bragged about owning outright had been suffocated under 3 separate reverse mortgages. The bank seized the property 9 months ago. The county auction receipt sitting on my kitchen island, the one my anonymous limited liability company purchased, was the final nail in their real estate coffin. They possessed no assets. Their credit scores hovered in the deep subprime margins. They had been evicted from 2 different short lease apartments in the last 6 months alone. This explained the desperation. This explained the sudden, unannounced arrival on my porch. But it did not explain the aesthetics of their arrival. When my mother stood on my front step demanding entry, she did not look destitute. She wore a pristine pastel cardigan. She carried a structured leather designer handbag that retails for over $3,000. Bankrupt individuals living in a rented recreational vehicle do not purchase luxury European accessories with cash. I opened a second search window. I shifted my focus from my parents to the golden child. I entered Tyler Hicks into the public records database. I pulled his address history, known business affiliations, and associated limited liability companies. His file was equally toxic. Every entrepreneurial venture he launched had dissolved into tax liens and unpaid vendor invoices. Yet Tyler drove a leased European sports sedan and maintained a membership at a premier country club. I cross-referenced his current mailing addresses. A new post office box in Provo appeared on the record opened just 4 weeks prior. I ran a soft inquiry credit trace associated with that specific post office box. The system returned a newly issued platinum revolving credit account. The primary account holder was Chloe Hicks. The pieces of the puzzle began snapping together with cold, undeniable logic. Tyler was not providing for his wife. He was bleeding her dry. He had opened high-limit credit cards using her pristine financial profile, funneling the physical plastic to a secondary mailing address she never monitored. He used her credit to rent the luxury motorhome for our parents. He used her credit to buy our mother the designer handbag likely to maintain the illusion of success and keep Beverly compliant. Tyler was operating a domestic Ponzi scheme. He stole from his wife to placate his parents, and he commanded his parents to steal my identity to replenish the funds. I leaned forward in my chair. The glow of the monitors reflected off the glass of my desk. If Tyler was brazen enough to drain his wife revolving credit lines, he would not stop at near retail purchases. He needed liquid capital to sustain his failing business ventures. He needed hard assets. Chloe was an architectural consultant. Before she met Tyler, she purchased a beautiful mid-century modern home on a half-acre lot in Provo. It was a premarital asset solely in her name. She had renovated it herself, building significant equity over the past decade. It was the most valuable piece of leverage in their marriage. I navigated to the Utah County Recorder official website. I bypassed the basic property search and entered the specific parcel identification number for Chloe House. I filtered the results by recent encumbrances and lien filings. A new document appeared at the top of the queue. It was recorded exactly 3 weeks ago. My chest tightened. I clicked the hyperlink and downloaded the scanned PDF. It was a home equity line of credit. The document authorized a cash withdrawal of $150,000 against the equity of the Provo property. The funds were directed to a joint checking account, one I knew Tyler controlled. I scrolled down to the final page of the contract. The lender required a notarized signature from the primary property owner to execute the lien. I stared at the digital ink on the screen. The name signed on the dotted line was Chloe Hicks. As a compliance auditor, I spend hundreds of hours every year examining physical and digital signatures to detect medical billing fraud. I know how human hands move across paper. I know the biomechanics of authentic writing. Chloe possesses an elegant, sweeping cursive stroke. She signs her name with confidence and fluid pressure. The signature on the screen was slow. The curves were hesitant. The ink pressure was uniform and heavy, indicating the writer was tracing a shape rather than executing a natural movement. The loops on the letters were pinched. It was a clumsy, amateur forgery. Tyler had stripped his wife of her financial security. He forged her signature on a federal banking document, stealing the equity from the home she built with her own hands. The notary stamp next to the forged signature caught my eye. I recognized the name. It was an associate from Tyler Country Club, a man who likely accepted a cash bribe to stamp a document without requiring physical identification from the signer. I sat back and exhaled. The sheer scale of my brother's betrayal was breathtaking. Tyler was not just a failed businessman. He was a financial predator. He had built a fortress of lies, and he was using our parents as his human shields. If the authorities discovered the fake auto loan application sitting on my desk, the physical handwriting belonged to Richard. If the postal inspector investigated the stolen mail, the cameras caught a masked figure, but the change of address form was tied to Beverly. Tyler was orchestrating the crimes, but he was insulating himself. If the house of cards collapsed, our elderly parents would face the federal indictments. Tyler would feign ignorance, claim his parents acted alone to survive their bankruptcy, and walk away with the stolen cash. He was willing to send the people who raised him to prison just to maintain his country club membership. I saved the forged equity line of credit to my encrypted drive. I saved the background dossiers. I secured the credit card traces. The evidence was bulletproof. I held the power to destroy Tyler, but executing the strike required precision. I could not fight a multi-front war from the outside. Tyler had embedded himself deep within Chloe's life. He controlled her mail, her bank accounts, and her perception of reality. If I went to the police right now, Tyler would shred the remaining documents, hide the stolen funds in offshore crypto wallets, and convince Chloe that I was a vindictive sister trying to ruin their marriage. He had spent years isolating her from me, feeding her lies about my selfishness to ensure we never communicated. He relied on that silence to keep his operation secure. To dismantle a parasite, you must introduce a lethal agent into its host. I needed someone on the inside. I needed someone who could access his personal laptop, retrieve his ledger passwords, and act as a silent witness to his daily movements. I needed the very woman he was currently destroying. I picked up my mobile phone and opened my contacts list. I had not spoken to my sister-in-law in over 3 years. Our last interaction was a strained holiday dinner where Tyler dominated the conversation, keeping her quiet and compliant. I navigated to her profile. I drafted a brief, sterile text message. I asked her to meet me tomorrow morning at a secluded coffee shop in Draper. I told her it concerned a critical legal matter regarding her premarital property, and I instructed her not to mention the meeting to her husband. I pressed send. The digital message flew into the ether. The board was set. Tyler thought he was playing a game of intimidation. He did not realize I was already organizing his execution. I turned off my monitors, knowing tomorrow I would hand a brilliant, unsuspecting woman the exact weapon she needed to end her marriage. The coffee shop in Draper sat off a quiet frontage road far away from the manicured subdivisions of Sandy and the corporate high-rises of Salt Lake City. I chose this location because it offered anonymity. The morning air carried a sharp chill. I sat in a corner booth facing the glass entrance, nursing a black coffee. My leather briefcase rested on the wooden bench beside me. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door opened. Chloe walked inside. My sister-in-law is a striking, brilliant woman. She runs a successful architectural consulting firm, manages high-value municipal contracts, and possesses a mind engineered for structural perfection. Yet, as she approached my table, she looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her posture, usually impeccable, carried the invisible weight of a deteriorating household. Tyler had spent years isolating her. He fed her a steady diet of manufactured grievances, painting me as the selfish, ungrateful antagonist who abandoned our destitute parents. He needed Chloe to view me as the enemy, so we would never compare notes. She slid into the booth opposite me. She did not take off her trench coat. She did not order a drink. She crossed her arms, constructing a physical barricade between us. "I only have 20 minutes, Giselle," she said. Her tone was defensive, laced with underlying hostility. "Tyler thinks I'm meeting a client. If you brought me here to justify locking your doors while your father and mother sleep in a vehicle, you can save your breath. I know you hate them. I know you have always prioritized your own comfort over the family, but forcing them onto the street is low, even for you." I did not defend myself. I did not raise my voice. I leaned back against the vinyl cushion and deployed the most effective interrogation tactic I possess: weaponized silence. I looked at her, maintaining steady, neutral eye contact. I let the quiet stretch. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. The ambient noise of the espresso machine filled the void. Chloe shifted in her seat. Her defensive armor required friction to maintain its strength. When I refused to push back, her momentum faltered. The certainty in her eyes flickered, replaced by a subtle, creeping doubt. "You asked me to come here regarding a legal matter," she finally said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "What do you want?" I reached into my briefcase and retrieved the thick, tabbed dossier. I placed it flat on the table. "I do not hate our parents, Chloe," I said. My voice was calm, projecting the clinical detachment of a surgeon delivering a biopsy result. "I simply refuse to fund their crimes, and I asked you here because you are currently funding them without your consent." I slid the folder across the table. Chloe stared at the manila cover. She hesitated, her architectural mind calculating the risk of opening it. She reached out and flipped the cover back. The first document was the rental agreement for the luxury motorhome. "Read the primary account holder name," I instructed. Chloe scanned the page, her brow furrowed. She read her own printed name, followed by the billing address and the last 4 digits of a credit card she rarely used. "I did not rent this," she whispered. "We do not have the budget for this." Tyler told me a friend from his country club loaned it to him as a favor. "Turn the page," I said. She turned the sheet. The next exhibit was a printed credit card ledger. I had highlighted a specific transaction from 2 weeks ago. It was a charge for $3,200 at a high-end European boutique. Tyler bought Beverly a designer handbag. "Using your Platinum account," I explained. "He intercepts the physical plastic, maxes out the credit limit to maintain the illusion of his wealth, and routes the billing statements to a secondary post office box in Provo." Chloe touched the paper. Her fingertips trembled. The foundation of her reality was beginning to fracture. How could she miss this? She is a meticulous professional who tracks municipal budgets down to the penny. The answer was simple: a classic tactic of domestic financial control. Tyler insisted on doing their household tax preparation. He convinced her that managing the domestic accounts was his contribution to their partnership, a way to alleviate her stress. In truth, he was building a blind spot. He intercepted the mail, curated the digital dashboards she was allowed to see, and isolated her financial vision. "There is one more document," I said softly. Chloe turned to the final tab. It was the home equity line of credit. She stared at the Utah County Recorder seal. She read the property address. It was her premarital home, the sanctuary she renovated with her own hands before Tyler ever entered her life. She saw the lien amount, $150,000, siphoned directly from her hard-earned equity into a joint checking account. Then, her eyes locked onto the signature line. She saw her own name forged in clumsy, hesitant ink. She saw the fraudulent notary stamp. I watched a profound psychological shift occur across the table. The defensive, exhausted woman who walked into the coffee shop vanished. The grief of betrayal washed over her features for a fleeting moment, a brief intake of breath, a single tear that pooled but never fell. Then the grief evaporated. It was instantly replaced by a terrifying cold and absolute rage. Chloe is an architect. When she spots a fatal structural flaw, she does not cry over the crumbling drywall. She calculates how to demolish the building. She closed the dossier. Her hands stopped shaking. She looked up at me, her dark eyes stripped of all illusion. "Tyler set them up," she said. Her voice was no longer hostile. It was a razor. "He is bleeding me dry to fund his lifestyle, and he is using Richard and Beverly to submit the physical paperwork so they take the fall if the authorities catch on." "He tried to use my social security number to buy a truck yesterday," I replied. "He dropped the application in a parking garage. That is how I found his paper trail." "He is desperate, Chloe. The walls are closing in on his debt, and he is burning everyone around him to stay warm. If you confront him right now, he will drain whatever liquid cash you have left, transfer it to an offshore crypto wallet, and destroy the remaining records." Chloe rested her hands on the dossier. She understood the stakes. A premature confrontation would ruin her. To dismantle a parasite, the host must play dead. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "I need an inside operative," I said. "I am building a federal fraud case against him. I have the postal violations and the forged vehicle application. But to secure a maximum indictment and recover your stolen equity, I need the master ledgers. I need the digital footprint on his personal laptop, the passwords to his proxy accounts." Chloe nodded slowly. Her mind was already organizing the logistics. "He keeps a locked external hard drive in his home office desk," she noted. "He never lets me touch his primary computer. He leaves for a golf round every Thursday morning at 7. I can access the hardware then." "You have to return to that house," I warned her. "You have to smile at him. You have to play the role of the oblivious, supportive wife. You cannot show him a single trace of anger. If he suspects you know the truth, he will initiate his exit strategy. I have survived municipal zoning boards, Giselle. I can handle a mediocre grifter, she replied. Her composure was chilling, a testament to her immense inner strength. We form an alliance right here. We build the trap together. When the time comes, I want to be the one who hands him the lawsuit. Agreed, I said. She slid the dossier into her own briefcase. She stood up, fastening the buttons on her trench coat. The dynamic between us had permanently altered. We were no longer estranged relatives, separated by a manipulator. We were architects of his destruction. Before she turned toward the exit, Chloe pulled her mobile phone from her pocket. She tapped the screen and slid the device across the table. "You need to prepare yourself," she said. "Tyler is not waiting for you to surrender. He is escalating the timeline." I looked at the illuminated screen. It was a calendar invitation Tyler had forwarded to Chloe, assuming she would blindly support his narrative. The event was scheduled for 8 o'clock tonight. It was a digital meeting link sent to our aunts, uncles, and family friends. The title of the event was an intervention. Tyler and my parents were orchestrating a coordinated, multi-generational ambush. They planned to use an audience of our peers to corner me, aiming to break my boundaries through sheer social humiliation. I pushed the phone back to Chloe. A faint smile touched the corner of my mouth. "Let them call," I said. Chloe gave a sharp, validating nod and walked out of the coffee shop, stepping into the cold morning air as a weapon primed for deployment. I finished my black coffee. The trap was expanding. Tyler thought he was assembling a firing squad for tonight, unaware that he was simply gathering an audience for his own inevitable execution. The digital clock on my living room mantel displayed 7:45 in the evening. Outside, the Utah sun sank below the Ochre Mountains, casting long, bruised shadows across my hardwood floor. Chloe sat beside me on the leather sofa. She held a glass of iced water, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the laptop resting on my coffee table. We were 15 minutes away from the scheduled family ambush. Tyler had circulated a web conferencing link to our extended relatives, branding the event as a necessary intervention to address my supposed cruelty toward our destitute parents. He intended to curate a narrative of victimization. We intended to capture a felony. I opened a secure audio capturing program on my desktop. I adjusted the input settings, ensuring the microphone array would record incoming network audio with pristine clarity. I turned to Chloe. I needed to verify her legal understanding of our actions. The state of Utah operates under a one-party consent statute regarding electronic surveillance. This legal framework dictates that as long as one active participant in a conversation grants permission, the entire exchange can be recorded and utilized as admissible evidence in a federal courtroom. By dialing into the meeting bridge and remaining on the line, we satisfied the statutory requirement. At 7:50, I initiated the connection. I did not use my personal registered account. I utilized a masked voice over Internet protocol, routing the connection through a generic dial-in number. When my digital avatar appeared in the virtual lobby, it simply displayed Caller 4. The connection established with a soft chime. Tyler had opened the bridge early to coordinate his strategy with our parents. They were already talking. Tyler sat in his home office. The webcam captured his tailored shirt in the expensive leather chair purchased with Chloe's stolen equity. Richard and Beverly shared a frame from the cramped interior of their rented motorhome. When the software chimed to announce my arrival, Tyler glanced at the screen. "That is probably Aunt Linda, dialing in from her landline," Tyler said, dismissing the notification with a wave of his hand. "She always connects 10 minutes early and leaves the phone on the kitchen counter. Ignore it. We need to align our story before the rest of the family joins." He handed us the keys to his own execution. He assumed he was speaking in a secure environment. He had no idea his wife was sitting 3 miles away, staring at his face on my monitor, recording every breath he took. The dramatic irony saturated the room. Tyler leaned into his microphone, adopting the tone of a seasoned battlefield commander instructing his infantry. "Listen to me," Tyler said. "When Uncle Marcus logs on, Mom needs to initiate the tears immediately. We stick to the script. Giselle is hoarding her wealth, and she is experiencing a mental health crisis. We are just concerned relatives trying to save her from herself. Do not deviate." Richard cleared his throat. The audio feed picked up the nervous tremor in my father's voice. "What if she brings up the post office box?" Richard asked. "What if she knows we forwarded her mail?" Tyler laughed. It was a cold, arrogant sound that echoed through my living room speakers. I watched Chloe flinch. "She does not know anything," Tyler scoffed. "She is an arrogant auditor who thinks she is untouchable because she works in a glass tower." The mail redirect is flawless. I bought a universal lockpick from a vendor forum last month. I stood on her porch at 2 in the morning and emptied her brass mailbox while she was sleeping. I have her investment statements. I have her pre-approved credit offers. We own her identity now. Beverly leaned into her respective camera. Her face looked drawn, etched with the stress of maintaining a multi-layered deception. "But what if the police trace the new credit lines back to us?" she whispered. "We are the ones signing the physical paperwork." Tyler rolled his eyes. He leaned back in his expensive chair, lacing his fingers together behind his head. "Nobody is tracing anything to you," he declared, "and nobody is tracing anything to me. I am routing the digital approvals through a proxy server, just like the equity line of credit I pulled on Chloe's house. You think the bank verified that signature? I signed her name on the dotted line while she was at a yoga class, handed a $100 bill to a notary at the country club, and walked away with $150,000. Chloe still thinks our household budget is tight. She is brilliant at architecture, but she is blind when it comes to her own ledger." I turned my head to look at my sister-in-law. Chloe did not cry. Her knuckles turned white against the glass of iced water. Her jaw locked with such force I could hear her teeth grinding. The man she married, the man she trusted with her future, was casually dissecting her intellect and mocking her loyalty to a pair of accomplices. He was bragging about dismantling her life. The audio waves on my recording software spiked and dipped, capturing the undeniable confession. Tyler had explicitly admitted to federal mail fraud. He had detailed the premeditated forgery of a banking document. He confessed to bribing a notary. The legal threshold for a criminal indictment was no longer just a possibility. It was ironclad. At 7:59, a second chime echoed through the bridge. Another relative was logging in. I reached forward and severed the connection. The screen went black. The audio feed terminated. We sat in the quiet living room. I did not log back into the meeting. I had no intention of attending an intervention engineered by a thief. The trap was fully armed. We possessed the digital equivalent of a smoking gun. Chloe set her glass onto the table. The condensation left a dark ring on the wood. She stood up. "I am going home," Chloe said. Her voice lacked any trace of its former warmth. It was a sterile, metallic instrument. "I am going to walk through the front door, kiss him on the cheek, and ask him how his family call went. I am going to make him dinner. And tomorrow morning, when he leaves for the golf course, I am going to rip every password from his hard drive." Our pact solidified in that moment. The bond between us transcended familial ties. It was a partnership forged in the crucible of mutual betrayal. I nodded, watching her gather her trench coat and walk out into the Utah night. I remained on the sofa, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a successfully executed audit. The financial threat was contained. The paper trail was secured. I assumed the next phase of the operation would simply involve presenting the dossier to a litigator and letting the federal justice system process the defendants. I was wrong. A cornered animal does not stop fighting simply because the cage door shuts. 10 minutes after Chloe departed, my mobile phone illuminated on the coffee table. A high-priority notification bypassed my silent settings. The alert generated from a major national life insurance carrier, a firm utilized by my corporate employer for supplementary executive benefits. I unlocked the device and opened the encrypted message portal. My breath caught in my throat. The clinical detachment I maintained for 3 weeks fractured for a fraction of a second. The notification was an underwriting alert. The system flagged an application submitted 45 minutes prior. Someone had bypassed the initial security gates and applied for a catastrophic term life insurance policy. The coverage amount was $500,000. The insured individual listed on the document was Giselle Hicks. I scrolled down to the beneficiary designation. The policy did not name a spouse. It did not name a charitable trust. The singular primary beneficiary entitled to receive $500,000 upon my death was Richard Hicks. I read the notification 3 times to ensure I was not misinterpreting the automated text. As a compliance officer, I am trained to separate emotional panic from raw data. But this data point carried a terrifying implication. Taking out a forged loan damages a credit score. Taking out a forged life insurance policy places a bounty on a human life. Tyler had orchestrated this maneuver. He knew my corporate benefit structure. He knew which carriers utilized automated online underwriting algorithms that required minimal physical medical examinations for policies under a specific threshold. He had likely used the intercepted mail, my social security number, and a forged digital signature to submit the application during the pre-meeting window. He designated our father as the beneficiary to insulate himself, following his established pattern of using his parents as human shields. If I died in an unfortunate accident, Richard would receive the tax-free payout. Tyler would then manipulate Richard into transferring the funds to his offshore accounts, wiping his own debts clean, while leaving our father holding the blood money. The sheer depravity of the calculation forced me to stand up and walk to the window. I checked the perimeter of my property. The street was empty. The motorhome was gone. But the threat level had fundamentally shifted. I was no longer dealing with desperate relatives. I was dealing with predators evaluating my net worth as a casualty. I walked back to my desk. The time for waiting was over. A fraudulent loan destroys a credit score. A fraudulent life insurance policy places a bounty on your head. The distinction is not subtle. It shifts the entire landscape of the conflict, from civil litigation to criminal endangerment. I stood in my home office, staring at the underwriting alert on my mobile device. The policy requested a payout of $500,000 upon my death. My father, Richard Hicks, was the sole beneficiary. My training as a senior healthcare compliance officer took over. Panic is a useless emotion. It clouds judgment and slows reaction times. Data provides a clear path forward. I opened my encrypted corporate workstation and bypassed the public portal for the insurance carrier. Because my firm contracts with this specific provider for executive benefits, I hold verified access credentials for their back-end fraud detection network. I navigated to the pending application queue and entered my social security number. The forged document populated on my screen. I immediately flagged the file under a critical compliance breach code. This action froze the underwriting process, preventing any automated approval software from issuing the policy. Next, I pulled the digital signature logs. In modern finance, an electronic signature is never just a name typed into a box. It is a data packet containing a timestamp, an internet protocol address, and device routing information. Extracting the data packet revealed the application was submitted using a virtual private network routed through a server in Eastern Europe. It was an amateur attempt to mask the origin location. But Tyler made a fundamental error. He failed to scrub the hardware identification string attached to the digital handshake. The string matched the unique device identifier of the personal laptop Chloe told me he kept locked in his home office desk. I exported the logs, the flagged application, and the carrier fraud alert. I placed them directly into the federal evidence dossier on my secure drive. The physical threat was neutralized, but the psychological implication remained. I could no longer treat my house as a simple residence. It required the operational security of a vault. The next morning, I contacted a private security contractor based in Salt Lake City. Within 4 hours, a technician arrived to replace every exterior entry point with high-grade biometric deadbolts. We installed motion-activated floodlights covering the perimeter and positioned discrete high-definition cameras inside the foyer, the living room, and the hallway leading to my master bedroom. Altering my daily routines became mandatory. I no longer parked in the driveway. I kept my vehicle secured inside the attached garage. Rerouting all essential communications to an encrypted secondary phone followed shortly after. The house was now prepared for a siege. Tyler realized his digital avenues were closing. The intercepted mail yielded no liquid cash. The auto loan remained stagnant due to my silent credit freeze. The life insurance application triggered a system lockout. He needed to break my physical boundaries, and he understood he lacked the strength to do it alone. So he weaponized the family. In Utah culture, community perception is a powerful currency. People will tolerate immense dysfunction behind closed doors as long as the public facade remains pristine. Tyler exploited this dynamic. He activated a coordinated smear campaign targeting our extended relatives, feeding them a narrative designed to provoke their righteous indignation. The assault began on a Thursday afternoon. My mobile phone started vibrating with a relentless cadence. I unlocked the screen to find a newly created group chat containing 14 different family members. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends populated the list. People I had not spoken to in over a decade suddenly felt entitled to dissect my morality. Aunt Linda sent the first message. She wrote that family is a sacred bond, and my refusal to house my destitute parents was a stain on my soul. Cousin Mark followed, demanding I stop hoarding my corporate wealth while my mother suffered from severe panic attacks in a cramped motorhome. Uncle David chimed in, stating my father was a proud man and it was my duty to offer him a comfortable retirement. They used words like selfish, ungrateful, and sociopathic. They knew nothing about the forged equity line of credit draining Chloe of her premarital assets. They knew nothing about the stolen mail or the fraudulent loan applications. They only knew the carefully constructed lies Tyler fed them. He presented himself as the exhausted, concerned brother, trying to reason with an irrational sister. Typing a response was out of the question. Arguing with manipulated individuals is a tactical failure. It provides them with ammunition and validates their intrusion. Instead, I opened my screen capture utility. I documented every accusation, every guilt trip, and every veiled threat. I captured the timestamps and the participant names. This group chat was not a source of shame. It was a roster of accomplices assisting a federal crime, even if they were ignorant of their role. Once I secured the digital screenshots, I muted the conversation. The phone went silent. Let them shout into the void. The silence infuriated Tyler. He expected a chaotic emotional reaction. He wanted me to lash out at Aunt Linda or defend myself to Uncle David. My stoicism starved him of the conflict he needed to control the narrative. By Friday evening, his patience disintegrated. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing the final compliance audit for my employer, when a direct message bypassed the muted group chat. It was from Tyler. The tone discarded the concerned brother persona and adopted the cadence of a cornered predator. "You think you can just ignore us," he wrote. "You think locking your doors and freezing your credit makes you invincible? I have scheduled a meeting for next Sunday evening with the local community elders and the neighborhood council. Mom and Dad are going to stand up in front of everyone and explain how you are financially abusing them. We are going to detail your mental instability. After that, I am forwarding their statements directly to the Human Resources Director at your healthcare firm. We will see how long you keep your corporate job when the entire valley knows what kind of monster you are." The message continued. "You have exactly 1 week. You will surrender the keys to the Sandy property by next Friday at sunset, and you will sign the deed over to Dad. If you refuse, we burn your reputation to ash. "Do not test me." I read the text twice. Tyler believed he held the ultimate trump card. He assumed my professional reputation and my social standing were my primary vulnerabilities. He thought the threat of public humiliation would force me to capitulate and sign away my sanctuary. He did not understand the woman he was threatening. I do not fear public scrutiny. I thrive in it. As an auditor, sunlight is my primary weapon. Tyler wanted to drag our private conflict into the public square. He wanted to involve the community elders and my corporate employer. I locked my phone and set it next to my coffee cup. He gave me a deadline of 1 week. He thought he was dictating the terms of my surrender. He did not realize he had just provided me with the exact timeline and venue I needed to execute his public destruction. The fabric of local society in my state is woven tightly around community councils and neighborhood boards. These men are not merely spiritual guides or social coordinators. They are regional bank managers, commercial real estate developers, and venture capitalists. They control the flow of local commerce and dictate the boundaries of social acceptance. Tyler intended to use this exact network as a tribunal to shame me. He believed he could stand at a podium, shed a few artificial tears, and convince these influential men to exile me from my own neighborhood. He assumed they would blind themselves to the facts and side with the patriarchal figurehead of our family. He forgot that I am a compliance auditor. I do not deal in gossip. I compile exhibits. I spent Thursday evening at a commercial print shop. I produced 6 identical copies of a 50-page forensic financial report. I utilized heavy cardstock for the covers and color-coded index tabs for the individual crimes. A proper audit leaves no room for interpretation. It relies on concrete data, verified signatures, and indisputable timestamps. I organized the documents chronologically, building a precise timeline of my family shifting from standard bankruptcy into felony identity theft. Friday afternoon arrived. This was exactly 48 hours before Tyler scheduled his public assault. I drove to the neighborhood council building and requested an urgent audience. The receptionist, noting my professional demeanor and the stack of bound dossiers, ushered me into the primary meeting room. The boardroom featured a long mahogany table surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. 5 community leaders sat waiting for me. They wore dark suits and solemn expressions. They expected a fractured, emotional daughter pleading for sympathy. They assumed I would beg them to intervene in a private domestic dispute regarding my destitute parents. I placed a bound report in front of each man. I remained standing at the head of the table. I did not shed a single tear. My voice remained steady and clinical. I told them my brother and father intended to use this chamber on Sunday to accuse me of financial abuse. I informed them I was providing the foundational documents for their review prior to that gathering, allowing them to make an informed decision regarding the liability they were about to host. I instructed the council to open the binders to the first tab. I connected my secure drive to the overhead projector and dimmed the room lights. I played the security footage captured by my doorbell camera. They watched my brother pick the lock on my mailbox in the dead of night, extracting my financial statements. I directed them to the second tab. I showed them the forged home equity line of credit, draining the premarital assets of my sister-in-law. I explained the forensic discrepancies in the signature line and identified the fraudulent notary stamp. I made it clear that Tyler was not just targeting me. He was actively destroying the brilliant, hard-working woman he married. The men at the table stopped looking at me with paternal pity. Their postures stiffened. The room grew silent. The only sound was the heavy rustle of thick paper turning. I moved to the final section. I presented the fraudulent life insurance policy, naming my father as the sole beneficiary upon my death. I detailed the digital signature logs, routing back to the personal computer in the home office of my brother. These community leaders are businessmen first and foremost. They understand risk metrics. A family disagreement is an annoyance they might try to mediate. Federal bank fraud, mail theft, and forged life insurance policies represent catastrophic legal liability. The leader sitting to my left closed his folder. He serves as a senior partner at a regional investment firm. He looked at the evidence, then looked at me. The color had drained from his face. He asked a single clarifying question. He wanted to know if the authorities were already involved. I informed him that I was securing federal counsel on Monday morning. He assured me this Sunday meeting was permanently canceled. He stated the council would take immediate, decisive action to protect the integrity of the community. In this culture, that specific phrase translates to a swift and merciless exile. When the trust is broken at this magnitude, the network closes its doors. The social and professional excommunication is instantaneous. I thanked them for their time, packed my briefcase, and walked out into the crisp autumn air. I drove back to Sandy. The afternoon sky faded into a deep violet twilight. I parked my car inside the secure garage and walked into my kitchen. I ground fresh espresso beans and brewed a dark cup of coffee. My house felt solid, impenetrable, and safe. I walked to the front window and adjusted the wooden blinds to observe the street. The rented motorhome sat parked across the asphalt. My parents had returned to their mobile staging ground, likely waiting for Tyler to finalize his script for their Sunday performance. Richard sat in the driver's seat with the door propped open. He was smoking a rare cigarette, staring out at the manicured lawns, projecting the image of a weary patriarch. Utah operates on an interconnected grid. When the council excommunicates a member, the financial arteries sever within hours. The leaders I briefed were already making phone calls, quietly warning their associates to distance themselves from my family. I watched my father holding his mobile phone. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the vehicle cabin. He answered an incoming call. Even through the double-paned glass of my living room, I could read the physical collapse of his posture. Richard relied on a private equity investor to maintain the illusion of his remaining business shell. It was a meager consulting contract, but it was his last source of pride and his only legitimate income stream. That investor served on a subsidiary board with one of the men I just briefed in the council room. The phone call lasted less than 60 seconds. I later learned the investor invoked a standard moral turpitude clause, freezing all operational capital and severing their partnership on the spot. He informed my father that his name was now toxic in the Salt Lake Valley. Richard dropped his phone onto the dashboard. He grabbed his chest. He was not faking a medical emergency this time to manipulate a hospital billing department. He was experiencing the crushing weight of total social and financial ruin. The invisible safety net he relied on for 6 decades had just dissolved into thin air. He was a bankrupt man sitting in a stolen recreational vehicle, and his reputation was dead. Richard stepped out of the vehicle. His knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the side mirror to steady himself. He looked around the quiet suburban street, searching the shadows for an anchor. His gaze drifted upward and locked onto my living room window. I did not step back into the dark. I did not hide. I stood in the ambient light, holding my ceramic mug. I took a slow sip of my coffee. He stared at me. His face contorted into a mask of pure terror. He realized the narrative was destroyed. He knew I held the matches that burned his bridges. The social war he thought he could win was over before it even began. But desperate men, stripped of their reputation, have nothing left to lose. The smear campaign failed. The digital theft failed. Tyler and Richard were cornered, which meant they were about to become physically unpredictable. It was time to gather Chloe and bring this mountain of evidence to a federal litigator who could finalize their destruction. Monday morning arrived with a sharp frost covering the Salt Lake Valley. I drove downtown, navigating the icy streets, to a sleek glass high-rise standing opposite the federal courthouse. Chloe met me in the lobby. She wore a tailored wool coat and carried a hard-shell briefcase. We did not exchange pleasantries. The time for small talk had evaporated the moment she realized her husband was a financial parasite. We stepped into the secure elevator and rode in silence to the top floor. The law firm of Marcus Sterling occupies the entire penthouse level. Marcus is not a family mediator. He does not negotiate domestic squabbles or facilitate therapy sessions. He is a ruthless federal fraud litigator. He spent 15 years prosecuting organized white-collar crime for the Department of Justice before transitioning to private practice. He specializes in dismantling complex financial syndicates, piercing corporate veils, and holding architects of fraud accountable. He was the exact weapon we required to end this war. His corner office featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-capped Wasatch Range. The aesthetic was strictly clinical. Minimalist furniture, polished concrete floors, and 0 personal photographs adorned the space. He sat behind a massive marble desk, projecting the cold efficiency of a tactical strike planner. We sat in the leather chairs opposite him. I did not waste his time with emotional preamble. I opened my dossier and laid the exhibits across the cool stone surface. I started the presentation with the forged home equity line of credit. I placed the fraudulent auto loan application next to it. Chloe opened her briefcase and handed him the digital ledger proving the misappropriation of her premarital funds to purchase luxury goods and rent the motorhome. Finally, I presented the intercepted postal records and the flagged life insurance policy bearing my father as the beneficiary, complete with the digital signature logs, tracing the virtual private network back to Tyler. Marcus picked up a silver pen. He reviewed the documents in absolute silence. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the office was the crisp turning of heavy cardstock and the faint hum of the climate control system. He cross-referenced the dates, examined the notary stamps, and scrutinized the device identification strings linking the digital forgeries to the physical hardware located in my brother's home. A standard attorney might express shock or offer sympathetic platitudes regarding the betrayal of my own bloodline. Marcus set his pen down and looked at us with predatory approval. "You have assembled a turnkey federal indictment," he stated. His voice was a low, steady baritone that commanded the room. "The mail theft falls under Title 18 of the United States Code. The forged equity document constitutes bank fraud, which carries a maximum penalty of 30 years per count. The life insurance forgery elevates the conspiracy to wire fraud and criminal endangerment. If I hand this binder to the United States Attorney today, your brother and your parents will spend the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary." He folded his hands together on the marble desk. "The legal threshold is met. But execution requires strategy. We need to dictate the exact terms of their collapse." Chloe unclasped her briefcase again. She withdrew a separate stack of legal filings. The realization of her husband's betrayal over the weekend had solidified into a tactical blueprint. She had spent Sunday night auditing her own accounts. She isolated every legitimate dollar earned through her architectural consulting firm, separating it from the polluted joint accounts Tyler controlled. "I am retaining your partner for my divorce proceedings," Chloe said, her tone devoid of any hesitation. "I have already drafted the initial filings. I am opening an irrevocable trust today, naming myself as the sole beneficiary and utilizing a separate tax identification number. I am routing my liquid capital into that shielded account this afternoon. Let Tyler try to drain a dry well." Marcus nodded. Shielding the capital was the first mandatory protocol, but dealing with the criminal elements required a psychological trigger. "If we present this evidence to the authorities right now," Marcus explained, "Tyler will initiate a defensive protocol. He will destroy physical hardware, transfer remaining funds into untraceable cryptocurrency wallets, and attempt to manipulate a grand jury into believing your parents acted independently. We need to force an unforced error. We need them to execute a tangible threat in physical space, leaving them 0 room for plausible deniability." I leaned forward in my leather chair. I told Marcus about the ultimatum Tyler delivered via text message on Friday evening, the demand to surrender the deed to my Sandy property by sunset at the end of the week. The promise to burn my professional reputation if I refused to comply. Marcus retrieved a fresh legal pad. He drafted a formal document. It was a cease and desist order, a 7-day notice commanding Tyler, Richard, and Beverly to halt all financial inquiries, surrender the fraudulent accounts, and sign the divorce settlement Chloe was finalizing. It warned that failure to comply would result in immediate federal prosecution and the liquidation of their remaining assets. "We are not sending this through certified mail," Marcus said, handing the crisp document across the desk. "You are going to hand-deliver it to him. We give them enough rope to hang themselves. We let the deadline expire. When they cross the threshold to collect your house, we drop the guillotine." We finalized the timeline. Chloe left the office to execute her financial transfers and secure her divorce retainer. I took the cease and desist order, placed it in my briefcase, and drove back to the suburbs. The winter sun dipped behind the mountains early, casting a gray chill over my neighborhood. I pulled into my driveway. The street remained empty. The rented motorhome was absent, a temporary reprieve, likely caused by my father losing his primary investor funding after the community council meeting. I parked inside the garage, lowered the reinforced door, and entered the mudroom. The house felt unusually still. I deactivated the primary alarm system to retrieve a package from the front porch. The quiet suburban evening masked the tension vibrating beneath the surface of my property. I walked into the kitchen and set my briefcase on the granite island. I poured a glass of filtered water and looked out the rear windows. My backyard is enclosed by a tall cedar fence, securing a private patio bordered by dormant rose bushes. The perimeter is designed to prevent unauthorized entry and protect my privacy. I noticed a discrepancy in the sightline. The heavy wooden gate at the side of the house stood wide open. It swung gently in the evening breeze, creaking against the hinges. I always secure that latch with a heavy steel padlock. I set the glass down. The water rippled inside the rim. I did not turn on the interior kitchen lights. I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, letting my eyes adjust to the fading twilight outside. A motion sensor floodlight, mounted near the roofline, flared to life, washing the patio in a stark, blinding white glare. 3 figures stood on the stamped concrete just outside my sliding glass door. My mother clutched her expensive trench coat around her shoulders, shivering in the cold air. My father stood beside her, his shoulders slumped, his face drawn and desperate from the social excommunication he endured over the weekend. They looked like refugees seeking asylum, but their presence was a calculated intrusion. Tyler stood at the front of the group. He did not look desperate. He looked lethal. He wore a dark jacket pulled tight against the wind. His jaw was clenched, his eyes locked onto the dark glass of my kitchen door. He was no longer trying to charm his way into my life. The veneer of the successful entrepreneur had shattered entirely, leaving only the raw, exposed nerve of a predator running out of time and options. I stepped closer to the glass. The biometric locks on the sliding door held firm, but physical barriers only delay the inevitable when an intruder is motivated by impending ruin. Tyler raised his right hand. The glare of the floodlight reflected off the object he gripped tight in his fist. It was a solid steel crowbar. He tapped the curved metal edge against the reinforced glass. The sharp clinking sound pierced the silence of the backyard. He was sending a message. The era of subtle financial manipulation and digital forgery was over. They had breached the perimeter of my sanctuary. The psychological warfare had escalated into a physical siege, and they expected me to panic and surrender the keys to my fortress. I stood in the dark, watching the metal tap against the glass, holding the federal document that would end his life as a free man. The sharp, metallic tap of the crowbar against my sliding glass door echoed through the dark kitchen. In a standard suburban household, a masked intruder or a hostile relative wielding a steel tool triggers an immediate panic response. Adrenaline floods the system. The homeowner dials emergency services and begs for intervention. I did not touch my phone to call the police. I touched my phone to activate the perimeter audio sensors. Tyler always relied on physical proximity to manufacture authority. Growing up, if a negotiation failed, he resorted to breaking things. He would corner me in the hallway, invade my personal space, and use his size to force a submission. He assumed adulthood operated on the same primitive rules. He believed holding a pry bar in the freezing Utah night negated the trail of federal felonies he left behind. He failed to realize my patio doors are engineered with double-paned, shatter-resistant security glass, designed to withstand blunt force impacts. He could swing that steel bar until his shoulders tore, and the glass would only spiderweb. I stepped forward out of the shadows. The motion sensor floodlights cast harsh, uncompromising angles across their faces. My mother looked frail, wrapping her arms around her designer coat. The chill of the evening was finally piercing the artificial reality Tyler constructed for her. Beside her, my father stood like a hollow shell. The excommunication from the community elders over the weekend had severed his pride. He was no longer a patriarch demanding respect. He was a dependent, trailing blindly behind a son who was marching them toward a cliff. Tyler stopped tapping the glass when he saw me approach. He raised his chin, projecting the faux confidence of a man holding a winning hand. He reached into his dark jacket with his free hand and withdrew a folded sheet of paper. He pressed it flat against the cold glass. I leaned in to read the bold print at the top of the page. It was titled A Family Loan Agreement. The terms outlined an immediate wire transfer of $200,000 from my accounts to a routing number I recognized as his offshore proxy ledger. "Open the door!" Giselle Tyler shouted. His voice was muffled by the thick insulation of the glass, but the audio receptors mounted under my eaves captured every syllable in crystal-clear high definition. I did not retreat. I reached down to the track of the sliding door. I engaged the secondary steel footlock, setting the heavy metal bolt exactly 2 inches from the frame. I unlocked the primary biometric handle and slid the glass open. The door hit the steel stopper with a solid thud. A narrow vertical gap allowed the freezing winter air to rush into my heated kitchen. Tyler immediately pushed his palm against the glass, attempting to force the door wider. The steel footlock did not yield a millimeter. He grunted in frustration, his polished veneer cracking under the physical resistance. "Sign the transfer," he demanded, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid gap between us. "We are done playing these games. You are going to authorize the wire and you are going to hand over the deed to this property. If you refuse, I will smash this glass walk into your living room and we will take what is owed to this family." He raised the crowbar an inch, presenting the weapon for my inspection. He expected me to flinch. He expected the sight of raw metal to override my compliance training. I looked at the crowbar, then I looked into his eyes. My expression remained entirely neutral. I did not raise my voice to compete with the wind. I spoke with the quiet, measured cadence of a corporate auditor delivering a terminal financial diagnosis. "You are trespassing," I said. "You are holding a blunt instrument on private property, and you are attempting to extort capital using threats of physical harm. Every word you just spoke is currently being recorded by the security array above your head and uploaded to an encrypted cloud server." Tyler glanced up at the eaves. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face, but his arrogance quickly smothered the doubt. "You think I care about a camera?" he sneered. "A camera does not stop this metal bar. Sign the document." I reached into my leather briefcase resting on the kitchen island. I bypassed the fraudulent loan agreement he was attempting to slide through the gap. Instead, I retrieved the formal notice drafted by Marcus Sterling just hours prior. The paper bore the embossed seal of a federal litigation firm. I folded it precisely down the middle and slipped it through the 2-inch opening. Tyler grabbed the paper. He stepped back, holding it under the glare of the floodlights to read the header. I watched his eyes scan the opening paragraph. The legal terminology was dense, uncompromising, and lethal. It was a formal cease and desist order detailing the exact statutes of the postal theft and the bank fraud he orchestrated. "You have exactly 7 days," I told him, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "You will surrender the proxy accounts. You will sign the divorce settlement Chloe drafted this afternoon, relinquishing any claim to her premarital assets. You will return the stolen equity, and you, along with Richard and Beverly, will vacate the state of Utah." My mother let out a small, terrified gasp. She looked at Richard, searching for reassurance that did not exist. My father stared at the concrete, unable to meet my gaze. He knew the document in Tyler's hands was not a bluff. He understood the severity of the men I briefed on Friday. "If the sun sets next Sunday and these terms are unmet," I continued, "my attorney will submit the master evidence dossier to the United States Attorney Office. You will be indicted for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, mail theft, and criminal endangerment. You will spend the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary." This was the moment of truth. This was the juncture where a rational human being calculates the risk, recognizes the checkmate, and surrenders. But Tyler is not rational. He is a narcissist who built his entire identity on the premise that he is the smartest person in any room. The realization that his wife and his estranged sister had outmaneuvered him, audited his crimes, and secured a federal litigator was too catastrophic for his ego to process. His mind rejected the reality of his own demise. He looked at the letterhead again. Marcus Sterling. The name commands respect in every courtroom in the Western Hemisphere. Tyler refused to grant that respect. He believed his own lies. He convinced himself that women lack the stomach for total war. He assumed Chloe was too weak to leave him, and I was too cowardly to send my own bloodline to prison. He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. The sound was brittle, echoing off the cedar fence surrounding my yard. He gripped the legal notice in both hands and ripped it down the center. He tore it again, shredding the thick parchment into uneven squares. He opened his fingers and let the pieces flutter down onto the frost-covered concrete. "You are a bluffing, ungrateful little girl," Tyler spat, pointing the tip of the crowbar at the narrow gap in the door. "You do not have the courage to file anything. You are trying to scare us because you know you have lost. Chloe is never leaving me, and you are never keeping this house." He stepped closer to the glass, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "Enjoy your week, Giselle. We will see you Sunday to collect." He turned on his heel. He did not look back. He marched across the patio, leading my silent, broken parents out through the wooden gate. They disappeared into the dark alleyway behind my property, leaving only the shredded pieces of their last chance for survival scattered on the frozen ground. I did not watch them leave. I slid the heavy glass door shut. I engaged the primary biometric lock and stepped away from the cold pain. Tyler had just made the final fatal calculation of his life. He chose to ignore the warning. He chose to maintain his posture of dominance rather than save his own freedom. He believed he could march up to my front door next weekend and force a surrender through sheer intimidation. He set the stage for his own absolute destruction. I walked back to my home office. The physical threat had receded, but the financial war required one last maneuver. I needed to ensure that when Sunday arrived, I did not just stop his crimes. I needed to own his future. I opened my laptop and pulled up the commercial debt acquisition portals. The trap was locked, and the countdown had officially begun. The shredded pieces of the federal cease and desist order remained frozen to my concrete patio for the rest of the week. I did not sweep them up. I left the torn paper resting on the ground as a physical monument to my brother making the worst calculation of his adult life. Tyler walked away from my sliding glass door, convinced his physical intimidation had secured a victory. He assumed my silence indicated submission. He believed I was spending the 7-day countdown, packing my belongings, and preparing to surrender the deed to my Sandy property. He was mistaken. I was not packing my bags. I was purchasing his entire financial existence. My professional expertise lies in corporate compliance, which requires an intimate understanding of the secondary debt market. When a business defaults on a commercial loan, the primary lender eventually tires of pursuing the dead weight. The bank writes off the loss for tax purposes and sells the delinquent paper to a collection syndicate for pennies on the dollar. The syndicate then attempts to squeeze whatever capital remains from the debtor. Tyler possessed a graveyard of failed entrepreneurial ventures. He favored launching boutique consulting firms and tech startups, outfitting lavish office spaces and abandoning the leases when the revenue dried up. To secure the initial operating capital for these doomed ventures, he signed personal guarantor clauses. A personal guarantee pierces the corporate veil. It means the creditor can seize the personal assets of the founder when the business entity collapses. On Monday morning, I logged into my secure workstation and accessed the commercial debt exchange portals. I utilized the same anonymous limited liability company I used to purchase the foreclosure deed for my parents' estate. I funded the acquisition account using my own liquid capital. I located the primary collection agency holding the largest block of my brother-defaulted commercial paper. The portfolio contained over $400,000 in unpaid vendor invoices, breached commercial leases, and delinquent operating loans. Tyler ignored these obligations for years, relying on his country club charm and aggressive lawyers to delay the collection efforts. The collection agency viewed the portfolio as toxic assets with a low probability of recovery. I contacted the agency broker representing the debt block. I did not negotiate over the phone. I submitted a cold, formal electronic bid. I offered to purchase the entire portfolio of Tyler Hicks for 12 cents on the dollar. The broker accepted the offer within 48 hours. By Wednesday afternoon, the digital transfer finalized. The electronic promissory notes and the original loan agreements routed into my secure corporate vault. The legal reality of this transaction fundamentally altered the power dynamic of our bloodline. I was no longer just the younger sister he threw onto the street 15 years ago. I was no longer a target for his extortion. I was his primary legal creditor. If Tyler attempted to declare Chapter 7 bankruptcy to escape the impending federal fraud charges, I would be the first entity sitting at the liquidation table. I held the legal authority to seize his leased sports car, garnish any future wages, and force the sale of his country club shares. He demanded the physical keys to my house on Sunday. I just purchased the legal keys to his entire future, and I bought them at a steep discount. While I secured the financial snare in Salt Lake City, Chloe executed her own tactical retreat in Provo. We communicated through an encrypted messaging application, avoiding any standard text channels Tyler might monitor. Chloe operated with the surgical precision of an architect dismantling a condemned building. Tyler maintained his rigid schedule, leaving the house every Thursday morning for his standing golf reservation. He thought his wife was safely occupied at her consulting firm, drafting blueprints for municipal clients. Chloe used those 4 hours to erase her footprint from his life. She rented a climate-controlled storage unit under a corporate alias. She methodically packed her irreplaceable items. She boxed up the family heirlooms passed down from her grandmother, the original deeds to her premarital property, and her sensitive financial ledgers. She moved the boxes out of the house in small, undetectable increments, leaving the aesthetic of their shared home undisturbed. She kept her clothing in the closet. She left her standard toiletries on the bathroom counter. Tyler noticed nothing. Narcissists rarely observe their environment unless the environment ceases to serve their immediate needs. As long as dinner appeared on the table and Chloe smiled when he walked through the front door, he remained blind to the reality that she was already gone. On Friday, Chloe finalized the capital transfer we discussed in the office of Marcus Sterling. She routed the entirety of her legitimate liquid assets into the newly established irrevocable trust. The account was shielded by a separate tax identification number, placing her wealth far beyond the reach of any joint banking privileges Tyler previously exploited. If he attempted to access her savings to fund his escape plan, his screen would simply display a zero balance. The weekend arrived with a hollow, suffocating silence. The rented motorhome did not return to my street. My phone did not vibrate with notifications from the manipulated extended family. Tyler and my parents were holding their breath, waiting for Sunday evening to fall. They spent the weekend sharpening their sense of entitlement, likely celebrating their perceived triumph. I spent the weekend resting. An auditor knows that the strength of a trap relies on the patience of the person waiting to spring it. Sunday morning broke clear and cold. The winter sun illuminated the snow on the Wasatch Peaks, casting a bright, sterile light through the tall windows of my living room. I woke up at 6 o'clock. I did not feel fear. I did not feel anxiety. I felt a profound sense of clarity. The 15-year cycle of exploitation and psychological abuse engineered by my father and perfected by my brother was hours away from permanent termination. I walked into my kitchen and prepared the battlefield. My kitchen island features a smooth, expansive slab of white granite. It provides the perfect canvas for displaying a forensic timeline. I retrieved the leather briefcase from my home office and extracted the primary evidence exhibits. I placed the forged auto loan application on the left side of the stone surface. I set the intercepted postal tracking documents and the flagged life insurance policy in the center. I printed the digital signature logs proving Tyler utilized a proxy server to forge the documents, placing those pages directly above the insurance application. Finally, I retrieved the heavy manila folder containing the real estate documents. I pulled out the original county auction receipt and the finalized foreclosure deed for the sprawling suburban estate my parents lost 9 months ago. I laid the deed on the right side of the island. The paperwork formed a perfect perimeter. It was a visual representation of their crimes, their failures, and their impending incarceration. I filled my French press with dark roasted grounds and poured boiling water over the beans. The rich aroma filled the quiet house. I pressed the plunger down, poured a steaming mug, and leaned against the counter. The clock on the wall ticked forward. Tyler promised to arrive at sunset to collect my signature and steal my sanctuary. He planned to march his human shields up my driveway, utilize his physical presence to intimidate me, and walk away with $200,000. He assumed the script was written in stone. He did not know I had burned his script and replaced it with a federal indictment. The sun dipped lower in the sky. The shadows stretched across the frosted lawn. At exactly 5:15 in the evening, the silence of the Utah winter was shattered. The sharp, resonant chime of my front doorbell echoed through the vaulted ceilings of my foyer. Day 7 had arrived. The chime of my front doorbell faded into the quiet expanse of my vaulted foyer. I stood in the kitchen for a brief moment, letting the silence settle. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer. I walked across the polished hardwood floor, disengaged the biometric deadbolt, and pulled the heavy oak door inward. The freezing winter wind swept into my heated house, carrying the distinct scent of desperation and exhaust fumes from the street. My father stood on the welcome mat. He wore his heavy wool overcoat, his chin raised in a posture of manufactured authority. Beside him, my mother gripped the handle of a designer rolling suitcase, her knuckles pale white in the cold. Behind them, Tyler stood with his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. A smirk played across his lips. They brought 6 pieces of matching luggage stacked neatly on my porch. They did not come for a negotiation. They came for an occupation. "Family takes care of family," my father announced. His voice was loud, intended to project dominance and force my submission right there on the threshold. I did not argue. I did not block the doorway. I stepped aside, gestured toward the illuminated hallway, and invited them inside. Richard pushed past me, his boots heavy on the floorboards. Tyler followed, dragging 2 large suitcases over the threshold. He looked up at my ceilings, admiring the architecture he intended to steal. They marched down the hall with the unearned confidence of conquerors. I closed the front door, locking the deadbolt behind them. I led them into the kitchen. The ambient lighting caught the polished edge of the granite island. The aroma of dark, roasted coffee filled the space. I picked up the French press and poured a steaming mug. My father stopped at the edge of the counter. He expected to see a blank check. He expected to find a printed property transfer document waiting for his signature. Instead, he looked down at the organized forensic timeline resting on the stone surface. His eyes scanned the heavy manila folder on the right side of the island. He recognized the address printed on the top sheet. It was his own estate, the sprawling suburban property he spent his entire adult life bragging about to his neighbors. He read the county auction receipt. He read the name of the purchasing entity. He looked at the final foreclosure deed. The smug expression dissolved from his face. The patriarchal mask cracked, revealing the terrified, bankrupt man hiding underneath. He realized his ancestral home was permanently gone, purchased at auction by an anonymous, limited liability company he could not control. Beside him, my mother stopped walking. The realization of the documents registered in her mind. Her grip loosened. The $3,000 leather handbag slipped from her fingers. It hit the tile floor with a dull, heavy thud. The sound punctuated the silence of the kitchen. Tyler did not look at the deed. He focused his attention on me. He stepped forward, assuming his parents were simply overwhelmed by my sudden compliance. "Stop staring at the paperwork," Tyler ordered his father. He turned to face me. "Where is the wire transfer confirmation, Giselle? We gave you 7 days. We are not leaving this house without the capital." I picked up my ceramic mug. I took a slow sip of the hot coffee. I looked at my brother, then shifted my gaze back to my father. "I am not giving you any capital, Tyler," I said. My voice echoed in the quiet room, crisp and clinical. "I invited you inside because I have a fiduciary duty to present the findings of my audit to the primary stakeholders." I reached across the island. I bypassed the auto loan applications and the forged life insurance policy. I picked up a thin black folder containing the digital ledger traces Chloe extracted from the personal hard drive of my brother. I held the folder out. I did not hand it to Tyler. I extended it toward my father. Richard hesitated. His hands trembled as he took the black folder. He opened the cover. "What are you doing?" Tyler snapped, stepping toward Richard. "Do not look at her garbage. She is trying to stall. Give me that folder." I kept my focus locked on my father. "Look at the routing numbers on the second page, Richard," I instructed. "Look at the destination accounts for the fraudulent personal loans you took out over the past 2 years." My father read the spreadsheets. His eyes darted back and forth across the columns. He possessed enough basic financial literacy to recognize a banking routing sequence. "When you filed for bankruptcy, I explained Tyler convinced you to leverage your remaining credit to secure high-interest survival loans. He told you he was investing those funds into a guaranteed commercial return to save your estate. He told you the money was tied up in a secure escrow account." Richard swallowed hard. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the page. "He lied," I stated. "The ledger you are holding traces every single dollar from your loans. Tyler did not invest your capital. He funneled the cash through a digital mixer and deposited it directly into 3 offshore cryptocurrency wallets. He controls the private keys to those wallets. The money is sitting in a server in the Cayman Islands, waiting for him to cash out." My mother gasped. She reached out and gripped the edge of the granite counter to steady herself. Tyler felt his narrative collapsing. His face flushed a deep, dangerous red. "She is fabricating those documents," Tyler yelled, stepping between Richard and the island. "She generated fake spreadsheets to turn us against each other. She is an auditor. She manipulates data." Tyler reached for the papers, but Richard pulled them back out of reach. My father continued reading. He saw the dates of the transfers. He saw the exact dollar amounts, matching his loan disbursements perfectly. "The financial theft is only the prologue." I continued, my tone dropping to a quiet, lethal register. Tyler knew the collection agencies were closing in on his commercial debt. He knew your bankruptcy offered 0 protection against his own failing businesses. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone to take the federal fall when the authorities eventually unraveled his fraud. I pointed to the forged auto application and the flagged life insurance policy resting on the counter. Look at the physical signatures on those documents, I told Richard. Tyler orchestrated the identity theft against me, but he made sure your hand held the pen. He directed you to sign the physical paperwork. He directed Beverly to submit the change of address form to the Postal Service. He insulated himself entirely. The architecture of the betrayal became visible to the naked eye. Tyler was the architect, but he ensured his fingerprints never touched the final blueprints. When the federal indictments drop for bank fraud and mail theft, I said the United States Attorney will trace the physical evidence directly to you and Beverly. You are the named applicants. You are the physical signers. The sentencing guidelines for these federal offenses require a mandatory minimum of 15 years in a penitentiary. Tyler planned to let you rot in a federal cell while he fled the jurisdiction with your stolen loan money. The kitchen fell into a suffocating, paralyzing silence. The dynamic of our entire family history shattered into dust. For 34 years, Tyler was the golden child. He was the brilliant son, the heir apparent who could do no wrong. My parents sacrificed their home, their retirement, and their relationship with their daughter to fund his endless ambition. They forgave his failures, they excused his temper, they believed his lies. Now Richard held the undeniable proof that his idolized son viewed him as disposable collateral. My father looked up from the black folder. He looked at Tyler. The fear in his eyes vanished, replaced by a visceral, primitive betrayal. The man who threw me onto the street at 19 suddenly realized he had backed the wrong child. He traded his daughter for a son who was currently feeding him to the wolves to save himself. Tyler, Richard whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of the revelation.
You set us up. You stole the loan money.
Dad, listen to me, Tyler pleaded, his arrogant facade crumbling into genuine panic. You cannot trust anything on that counter. We came here to get our house. We need to focus on the plan.
There is no plan, Richard roared.
The sudden explosion of sound rattled the coffee mugs on the counter. My father lunged forward with raw force. He dropped the black folder and grabbed Tyler by the lapels of his dark winter jacket. The impact drove Tyler backward into the stainless steel refrigerator. The heavy metal dented inward under their combined weight. Richard slammed his son against the appliance. You were going to let me go to prison, Richard screamed, spittle flying from his lips. I lost my house for you. I ruined my name for you. My mother let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She covered her face with her hands, collapsing against the side of the kitchen island, unable to process the physical altercation erupting in her perfect family. Tyler shoved his father away, breaking the grip on his jacket with a sharp thrust. He stumbled sideways, breathing heavily. He looked at Richard, then looked at Beverly, weeping on the floor. He realized he had lost his human shields. His parents were no longer compliant pawns. They were hostile witnesses holding the physical proof of his offshore accounts. He turned to me. His eyes were wide, darting toward the exits. The realization of his complete isolation crashed down upon him. He had no leverage. He had no allies. He had no money. I owned his commercial debt, and I possessed the federal evidence required to bury him. Tyler did not attempt to argue. He did not offer another threat. The instinct for self-preservation overrode his ego entirely. He spun around, his boots slipping momentarily on the polished hardwood floor, and scrambled toward the illuminated hallway leading to the front door. He abandoned his suitcases. He abandoned his weeping mother. He abandoned the father he just betrayed. He ran toward the exit, desperate to escape the trap I built inside my home. I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter. I did not chase him. I did not call out his name. I watched him sprint down the hall, knowing exactly who was waiting for him on the other side of that heavy oak door. Tyler scrambled down the hallway. His leather boots slipped against the polished oak planks. He reached the entryway and grasped the heavy brass handle. He expected the dark, empty street. He expected a clear path to his leased sports sedan and a swift escape into the sprawling Salt Lake Valley. He disengaged the lock and threw the heavy panel open. The freezing winter wind swept across the threshold, but the path was not clear. Chloe stood on the concrete porch. She wore a tailored charcoal trench coat, her collar turned up against the biting frost. The soft glow of the amber exterior light illuminated her features. She did not look like the compliant, isolated spouse Tyler left behind that morning. Her posture radiated an unyielding, glacial authority. She held a thick stack of legal documents pressed against her chest. Tyler froze. The sudden appearance of his wife derailed his frantic momentum. He let out a breathless, nervous chuckle, attempting to summon the charismatic persona he always used to manipulate her reality. "Chloe, honey, what are you doing here?" he stammered, stepping onto the mat. "We need to leave right now. Giselle is trying to frame us. We have to get to the car." Chloe did not move. She did not blink. She looked at the man she married with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. "I am not going anywhere with you, Tyler," she said. Her voice cut through the cold air, sharp and resonant. "I spent the weekend reviewing the digital ledgers you hid on your hard drive. I saw the offshore cryptocurrency transfers. I saw the fraudulent equity line you secured against my home. I know exactly who you are." Tyler opened his mouth to deploy another lie, but Chloe stepped forward and slammed the thick stack of legal filings directly against his chest. Instinct forced him to grab the papers before they fell. "Those are the finalized divorce petitions," Chloe stated, keeping her eyes locked onto his. "Accompanying them is a civil lawsuit for systemic financial fraud and asset misappropriation. I transferred every legitimate dollar I earned into an irrevocable trust yesterday afternoon. You do not have access to my bank accounts. You do not have access to my credit. You are walking away with nothing." Tyler stared at the stark black text on the top page. His breathing grew shallow. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and rising terror. "You cannot do this," he whispered. "I already did," she replied, stepping aside to reveal the true depth of the snare. From the deep shadows near the edge of the porch, 3 figures emerged. Marcus Sterling stepped into the amber light. The federal litigator wore a pristine midnight overcoat. He carried a slim leather briefcase and exuded the undeniable aura of a predator who had cornered his prey. Flanking Marcus were 2 men wearing plainclothes tactical jackets. Silver badges hung from heavy lanyards around their necks. They were state fraud investigators, sworn officers holding active warrants.
"Good evening," Tyler Marcus said, his baritone voice commanding the immediate space. "Your wife retained my partner for her domestic separation. I represent your sister." We spent the morning reviewing a substantial forensic dossier with the United States Attorney. Tyler took a step backward, his shoulder blades hitting the wooden frame of the doorway. The charismatic facade shattered, exposing the hollow core of a coward. "You have 0 leverage left," Marcus continued, delivering the tactical strikes with rhythmic precision. "Your offshore accounts are frozen, pending a federal inquiry. The Community Council excommunicated you on Friday, and before you consider filing for bankruptcy protection to stall the civil penalties, you should understand the current status of your commercial obligations." Marcus gestured toward the interior of the hallway, where I now stood observing the confrontation. "Your sister utilized a private limited liability company to purchase your entire delinquent debt portfolio," Marcus explained. "She acquired the vendor invoices, the breached leases, and your operational loans. She is your primary secured creditor. Every physical asset you possess, including the vehicle parked at the curb, now legally belongs to her firm." Tyler looked at me. The reality of his total subjugation finally pierced his ego. I did not just defeat his extortion attempt. I owned his past, his present, and his future. He possessed no wealth, no family, and no sanctuary. The state investigators moved forward, their boots crunching on the frost-covered walkway. The lead officer unclipped a pair of steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "Tyler Hicks, the investigator," announced, his tone devoid of any emotion.
"You are being detained on preliminary charges of felony bank fraud, identity theft, and criminal forgery."
The sight of the metal restraints triggered a primal, pathetic panic inside my brother. He realized his bespoke suits and his country club memberships could not shield him from a concrete cell. The instinct for self-preservation consumed whatever residual loyalty he held for his bloodline. He spun around, facing the interior of my foyer. He pointed a trembling finger down the illuminated hallway. "It was not my idea," Tyler screamed, his voice cracking into a high, hysterical pitch. "It was her. My mother orchestrated the entire scheme." Beverly stood near the entrance of the kitchen, her hands covering her mouth. Richard stood beside her, still clutching the county auction receipt. They watched their golden child unravel. "She executed the postal redirect," Tyler yelled, stepping toward the officers and gesturing frantically toward Beverly. "She stole the mail." Richard signed the vehicle applications. They were bankrupt and desperate. "I just gave them financial advice. I did not forge anything." They used the virtual private network. They set up the proxy accounts. "You have to arrest them." The sheer depravity of his betrayal hung in the freezing air. He was actively offering his elderly parents to the penal system in a desperate bid to purchase his own freedom. He was willing to watch his mother die in a federal penitentiary if it meant he could escape the consequences of his own greed. Beverly heard every word. The illusion she maintained for 34 years shattered into jagged, irreparable fragments. The son she idolized, the boy she sacrificed her own daughter to protect, was begging law enforcement to lock her in a cage. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the hardwood floor, emitting a guttural, agonizing sob. She folded inward, clutching her chest, as the psychological devastation tore through her nervous system. She traded her innocent daughter for a parasite, and the parasite had just consumed her. Richard did not move to comfort his weeping wife. He stood paralyzed. His eyes were vacant, staring straight ahead at nothing. He held the foreclosure deed to a house he no longer owned, listening to his only son condemn him to a prison sentence. The patriarchal authority he wielded like a weapon his entire life was reduced to ash. He was a broken, destitute old man standing in the hallway of the daughter he discarded. The lead investigator did not entertain the frantic accusations. He grabbed Tyler by the right bicep, spinning him around with practiced, effortless force. He pushed Tyler against the brick facade of my home. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer recited, pulling Tyler's arms behind his back. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The cold steel cuffs ratcheted tight around his wrists. The sharp mechanical clicking sound signaled the definitive end of his reign. Tyler stopped screaming. He slumped against the brick, his head hanging low, his breath coming in shallow, defeated gasps. The bravado evaporated, leaving a ruined, trembling shell. The second investigator took custody of my brother, guiding him down the driveway toward a dark, unmarked cruiser idling at the curb. Chloe watched him walk away. She did not shed a tear. She adjusted her trench coat, gave me a single validating nod, and walked toward her own vehicle. She was walking toward a future defined by her own brilliance, free from the anchor that nearly drowned her. Marcus Sterling tipped his head in acknowledgement, turned, and followed the officers toward the street. I stood alone in the doorway of my fortress. The red and blue emergency lights from the cruiser painted the frost-covered lawns of my neighborhood in rhythmic, sweeping flashes. I watched the officer guide Tyler into the back seat of the vehicle. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing him inside the consequences of his own arrogance. The cruiser shifted into gear and pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the dark expanse of the Utah night. The winter wind swept across my porch, crisp and purifying. The storm I warned them about had finally arrived, and it swept the debris from my property entirely. I turned my gaze back into the warm, illuminated hallway of my home. My mother wept on the floorboards. My father stared into the void. They were guests in a sanctuary they tried to steal, waiting for instructions from the owner they tried to destroy. I stepped inside, knowing the final chapter of this audit required one last definitive action. I closed the heavy oak door. The flashing emergency lights from the police cruiser faded from the frosted glass panels. I turned around and faced the interior of my home. My mother remained on the floorboards, her designer coat wrinkled beneath her. Her tears stained the polished wood. My father stood near the kitchen island, his posture defeated, his hands empty. The arrogance that fueled his entry into my sanctuary had evaporated, leaving behind a frail, hollow shell of a patriarch. They expected me to offer comfort. They assumed the arrest of their golden child would trigger my sympathy, prompting me to invite them into the guest room and brew herbal tea. They still believed the biological tie we shared obligated me to cushion their fall. I walked to the front closet and retrieved their coats. "You have 10 minutes to contact a taxi service," I told them. My voice was calm and steady. "I will place your luggage on the front porch. You are no longer welcome inside this house." My mother looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Giselle," she whispered, "we have nowhere to go. The motorhome lease is canceled. We have no money." "You made your choices," I replied. "You chose to assist a thief. You chose to target my identity. The consequences of those choices belong to you. The front door is open." Richard did not argue. The fight had been drained from his veins. He reached down, grasped my mother by the elbow, and pulled her to her feet. They gathered their coats in silence. They dragged their matching suitcases across the threshold and stepped out into the freezing winter night. I did not watch them wait on the curb. I closed the door, engaged the biometric lock, and activated the perimeter security system. The profound, absolute silence of my home returned. The air felt clean. The invasion was over. The federal justice system does not operate with the dramatic speed depicted on television. It grinds forward like a glacier, slow and inescapable. Marcus Sterling delivered our forensic dossier to the United States Attorney on Monday morning. The state investigators transferred custody of my brother to federal marshals. The grand jury reviewed the digital signature logs, the forged equity documents, and the intercepted postal records. The indictments followed swiftly. Tyler faced multiple charges of felony bank fraud, mail theft, and criminal forgery. The prosecuting attorneys presented a mountain of indisputable evidence. They offered a plea arrangement to avoid a lengthy public trial. Tyler accepted. He surrendered his remaining freedom for a reduced sentence in a low-security federal penitentiary. The plea agreement required full financial restitution. This is the exact moment my limited liability company entered the legal arena. I held his delinquent commercial paper. I owned his defaulted business loans. When the bankruptcy court appointed a trustee to liquidate his life, I sat at the front of the creditor line. The court seized his leased sports sedan. They liquidated his fractional share at the country club. They emptied his remaining proxy accounts. The federal marshals seized the offshore cryptocurrency wallets using the digital keys Chloe extracted from his hard drive. The court routed the recovered capital directly into my corporate accounts to satisfy his outstanding debts. Tyler walked into a federal prison cell possessing zero assets. The wealth he projected to the world was an illusion. The poverty he earned was real. Chloe secured her freedom with surgical precision. The domestic court finalized her divorce in record time. Because she routed her legitimate capital into an irrevocable trust prior to the criminal indictments, the asset forfeiture did not touch her wealth. She retained sole ownership of her premarital property. She removed his name from the title and restored her original surname. She rebranded her architectural consulting firm and secured 3 new municipal contracts before the year ended. We do not call each other every day. We do not share holiday dinners, but we share a mutual respect forged in the fires of a shared battlefield. We are allies who survived the same predator. My parents faced the stark, unyielding reality of their actions. Their golden child attempted to offer them to the federal authorities to save his own skin. The community council enforced the social excommunication. The private equity investors severed all ties. Richard and Beverly possessed zero capital, zero credit, and zero social standing in the Salt Lake Valley. They applied for state assistance.
The Regional Housing Authority processed their paperwork and placed them in a subsidized, low-income senior facility on the industrial side of the city. It is a sterile, concrete building with linoleum floors and fluorescent lighting. They demanded I surrender my vaulted ceilings and custom granite. They demanded I sacrifice my financial future to cover their mistakes and fund their illusions. Now they share 400 square feet of state-funded charity. They enabled a parasite for 3 decades, feeding his ego and excusing his cruelty. In a stroke of poetic justice, the parasite finally drained the host. They are living the exact life they tried to force upon me 15 years ago. I secured my digital perimeter. I placed a permanent lifetime freeze on my credit profile with all 3 major bureaus. If I need to open a new account or finance a vehicle, I utilize a secure PIN code to lift the restriction for a designated 24-hour window. It adds 10 minutes to my financial transactions. It is a minor inconvenience I gladly pay for absolute security. I upgraded my postal delivery to a secure commercial drop box. I maintain the biometric locks on my doors. My house remains a fortress. I monitor my ledgers with the same clinical precision I apply to my corporate healthcare audits. The numbers tell a story of stability. My retirement accounts compound undisturbed. My equity grows. I built this sanctuary brick by brick, and I hold the sole authority over who crosses the threshold. It is Sunday morning. I am sitting on my back patio holding a mug of dark roasted coffee. The winter frost has thawed, replaced by the early green buds of a Utah spring. The cedar fence surrounds my yard, providing an unbroken perimeter of privacy. The air is still. No one is tapping a steel crowbar against my glass door. No one is demanding I sign away my sanctuary. I reflect on the concept of family. Society teaches us that blood is a binding contract, an infinite obligation that supersedes logic and personal safety. We are conditioned to forgive toxic relatives because they share our genetics. We are told to absorb their financial abuse, their emotional manipulation, and their deceit to maintain the illusion of peace. That is a dangerous lie. Family is not a blank check for abuse. Shared DNA does not grant a license to steal, extort, or destroy. When someone looks at your hard work and calculates how to extract it for their own benefit, they cease to be a relative. They become a threat. Setting a firm boundary is not an act of revenge. It is an act of self-preservation. Refusing to set yourself on fire to keep toxic people warm is the most fundamental right you possess. I did not destroy my parents. I did not ruin my brother. I simply held up a mirror, presented the data, and allowed the legal system to process the reality they created. I protected the life I built from the people who tried to tear it down. I take a slow sip of my coffee. The silence of my home is profound, earned, and safe. If you have ever had to legally protect yourself from your own blood, drop a comment and tell me what boundary you finally enforced. And if you want to hear more stories of people taking their power back, hit subscribe. Remember, your name belongs to you. Nobody gets to borrow it without asking.